A very good morning to everyone, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests, and passionate advocates for climate action. Welcome to Day 7 of the Malaysian Support for the COP30 event, which is a 10-day virtual journey held in conjunction with the UN Climate Change Conference in Belém, Brazil. Over the next 3 days, we'll be exploring a variety of key climate themes that highlights how Malaysia is turning climate ambition into meaningful action. Additionally, you're welcome to visit the website to check out the daily themes. Today's theme, Emerging Voices for Change, highlights a deep dive into the power of young leaders and change makers driving climate action. It also highlights how youth innovators and grassroots movements are turning advocacy into real solutions, shaping policies, strengthening resilience, and leading the charge towards a just and sustainable future. To kickstart our program, we begin our conversation with Dr. Gary Theseira, Chair of the Council of CGM, themed Emerging Voices Climate Actions Across Generations. He will be joined by Mr. Ariff Amir Ali, Advocacy Director for the United for Earth organization known as YUFE. They will be discussing the highlight from COP30's youth and inclusion sessions, together with how young innovators are shaping policy and practice globally. Please join me in warmly welcoming the both of them as they share their insights and reflections to open our Day 7 conversation.
Thank you very much, Aaron. Very good morning, everyone, and thank you for sticking with us this long. It's heartening to see that we still have viewership here on this second week. It's for us the second day of the second week, but for the reports as far as the COP in Belém goes, we were making yesterday's report. It was still Sunday in Belém, so technically they only began the second week, as it were, yesterday for our time, and then the first updates have begun trickling in on the second week of the COP. Now, as I mentioned before, the second week of the COP is known as the high-level segment. What happens then is that all the documents in their various states of completion from the official level of the COP during the first week are brought forward to the second week of the COP, during which in the high-level segment, ministers will begin debating and negotiating on the parts of the various documents that have not been able to achieve consensus to this point. And normally these impasses will be finalized by the ministers, if at all possible. Now, the COP presidency, of course, has been very active in tracking the progress of all the agenda items of the COP, and indeed, even before the opening of the final week, Ambassador Andre Aranya Delago already was planning for the second week. In fact, they convened the plenary of the governing bodies of the UNFCCC, Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement, what is known as a joint plenary of the supreme bodies, to outline the mode of work for this week, the final week of the climate talks, saying that this is, quote, towards a strong and successful work in Belém. And as we know, the talks that began on the 10th of this month are expected to conclude on the 21st of this month. And we will, of course, bring you coverage all the way up to the 22nd to capture what happened on the 21st and to update you as necessary. Now, the presidency of the COP outlined three main tracks of work moving forward in the second week. The first is to conduct, or rather the beginning of the ministerial-led consultations, focusing on outstanding political issues. That's the first track. The second track is the continuation of the technical work on a very limited set of issues where emerging political guidance will be incorporated. And the third will be actually individual presidency consultations. Now, for the ministerial consultations, the COP presidency has been very busy. What they've done is they've invited 30 they've invited pairs of ministers to lead on each of the outstanding issues. And these are the issues that will benefit from political guidance under Track 2, specifically on the global stocktake. Ambassador Andres Belém from Norway, plus another minister will head that one. Second minister, normally from a developing country. On adaptation, 2 ministers, one from Gambia, Rohi John Manjang, and from Germany, Jochen Flasbarth. On finance, we have Ed Miliband from the United Kingdom, a long-time player in this, and Deborah Longo Brasa from Kenya. On mitigation, we have from Spain, Sarah Agson, and from Egypt, Wael Abu Majid, while also another long-time ministerial negotiator in the COP. On the just transition, we had Alicia Barcena from Mexico and Christoph Bolesta from Poland. 2 more on technology, Chris Bowen from Australia, Chris also another familiar face at the COP, and Bhupender Yadav from India. And finally on gender and climate change, Maisa Rojas from Chile and Elena Drissen from Sweden. So all of these ministers are now going to be coordinating and leading the political guidance to their respective agenda items. And in fact, later on today, I mean, it's today for us now, November 18th, but when the day opens in Brazil, these ministerial consultations will report back on progress achieved in these negotiations. The presidency also announced that a summary note is scheduled to be produced on the presidency consultations on the 4 agenda items which have been ongoing since the first week of the COP. And these are the ones that did not enjoy full support, but it was regarded as important that they continue. So the presidency has been following up on these. And the outcome of the summary report will include progress on, first of all, implementation of Article 9.1 of the Paris Agreement. This is the article which relates to the mandatory provision of finance from developed to developing countries, a highly controversial issue. Second, on promoting international cooperation and addressing the concerns with climate change related trade restrictive unilateral measures. So this also another very, very controversial issue, and it's no secret why it's here. And then the third one, responding to the synthesis report on nationally determined contributions and addressing the 1.5 degree centigrade ambition and implementation gap. The last one being reporting and review pursuant to Article 13 of the Paris Agreement, which relates to biennial transparency reports. And this summary note will capture any progress or lack thereof and be used to further structure the conversation moving forward. The presidency also invited parties to reflect on balance and potential misrepresentation of topics. I think this is always a problem. And this was in a summary note that the presidency did publish. But the key issues were that the presidency feels that they need to make sure that the process continues in the right direction and at a significant pace. Because I think, as was mentioned earlier, the direction was right, but the pace was too slow. So the summary note by the presidency frames the direction by the parties as follows. What we need is a strong message around multilateralism, around people, and around accelerating implementation. That they want this to be the COP of truth, meaning that they are putting transparency at the very top of the priority. that transition from negotiations to implementation is paramount, because as always we can talk forever and ever, to significantly enhance international cooperation for accelerating implementation. So where at all possible and with whatever is at hand and willing to move to accelerate the implementation. To maintain faithfulness to the Convention, the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement, including its purpose, long-term goals, principles and provisions, as well as its architecture and policy cycle. Now this is an interesting way of putting it, because this is completely in line and fully consistent with the advisory opinion put out by the International Court of Justice this year. Also, the presidency was committed to no new obligations or commitments beyond the instruments and agreed decisions, which means no reopening and renegotiating any of the agreed frameworks. The importance of sustainable development, poverty eradication, and the tackling of inequalities. I think this is going to be a growing issue moving forward, that current structural and developmental frameworks are generating very, very significant inequalities in society, both between nations as well as within nations. The summary note also wants to handle climate action and impacts, and it wants to have these things linked to sustainable development. And above all, I think this has been repeated many, many times by the presidency. They want this COP to put people at the center of climate change. Important role and active engagement, particularly of non-party stakeholders. So, as we've traditionally seen, the COP is a venue largely for governments. The convention and the implementing agreements, things like the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement, are binding only on states. But once again, the players and the stakeholders involved in climate change are actually very, very diverse, from civil society, business, corporations, etc. And they include some of the most vulnerable stakeholders, including women, children, and others. Now, in response to this plenary and all these announcements by the presidency, a couple of countries took the floor, took the opportunity to make statements. Chile took the floor to comment on the agenda item on linkages between the technology mechanism and the financial mechanism. This was one of the areas that could not be concluded due to a lack of consensus among parties. Chile wanted this matter to be discussed again on the work of parties made this year, including the draft text prepared by the co-facilitators, and expressed that it will propose this during the closing plenary of the Belém talks. Honduras, for the Coalition of Rainforest Nations, now CFRN, or the Coalition for Rainforest Nations, is a fairly mature coalition in the UNFCCC, but it has undergone some evolution, you might say. And the chairs of this particular coalition rotate, and in this cycle it's Honduras. Honduras highlighted the need to have a roadmap to halt and reverse deforestation and forest degradation by 2030 in accordance with Article 5 of the Paris Agreement, adding that since this was an implementation COP, it is also currently working with parties on a draft decision text for this particular agenda item. Now there was also the SBI closing plenary, and at this closing plenary, a number of delegations took to the floor. The delegations of China, for the like-minded developing countries, expressed disappointment that developed countries continue to link the institutional arrangements of the Adaptation Fund for its transition to serve the Paris Agreement to the membership of the Adaptation Fund Board, where there are clear political divergences. The LMDC said that we don't see it as a package deal. There is no relationship between the two. So saying that this linkage is artificial and that it shouldn't be there, it requested the developed countries to adopt a decision in Belém without holding the institutional arrangements hostage to the smooth transition of the Adaptation Fund, which is of critical importance to all developing countries. Turkey said that it would not accept any new classification and linkage between the convention's annexes and a classification between developed and developing countries in the Paris Agreement, citing that this is a red line for Turkey. Now, this intervention by Turkey was supported by the Russian Federation. Now, in this case, what Turkey is referring to is the actual original agreement in which the annexes were decided. And we have, of course, the Annex 1 countries that are regarded as the developed countries, the Annex 2 countries that are the developed countries that actually have an obligation, a financial obligation to provide support to developing countries, and the non-Annex 1 and Annex 2 countries, which are the developing countries. The European Union said that it concurred with many parties' views on the transition of the Adaptation Fund. It said the Adaptation Fund has to be, the transition has to be achieved here at this COP. And as part of this transition, we also have to make sure that the fund has a fully functional board. The changes in terminology that they are proposing, they claim is in line with the Paris Agreement. And they said that in Bonn, we worked on language that provided comfort for parties that have concerns with this. So now, very clearly between the like-minded developing countries and the EU, divergence of opinion on how to handle this issue with the Adaptation Fund. Another piece of news coming out of the COP at the beginning of the second week is the idea being broached of imposing national mitigation targets. Now, the like-minded developing countries supported or represented by I think in this case it's Sri Lanka, pointed out that the UNFCCC synthesis report of the biennial communications from parties showed that none of the Annex 1 parties are on track to reduce their greenhouse gas emission targets of 2030, emphasizing that developed countries are not taking the lead in these mitigation efforts. The Arab group also added their voice to this, and the outshot of this is essentially that a lot of work needs to continue on whether or not the national mitigation targets should be imposed. The groups are very, very divided, and in this case, of course, between developed and developing countries. These groups include, as I mentioned, the LMDC, the Arab group, the small island developing countries, and the Africa group as well. Right. So this space is an extremely divided space, and the countries are all over the place, and hopefully we can do a little bit of analysis on this. Because I'm running out of time now at 8:19. But this is something that might be important come the closing plenary, and how this matter is going to be handled moving forward, I think is going to be of vital importance. All right. So I see that I'm out of time for the update from Belém in Brazil. And I will now turn to our special guest for this morning, and that is Mr. Ariff Amir Ali from YUFE, and perhaps he might like to begin by telling us what YUFE is and what it does. But then we'll get into the thematic area of this morning's discussion, which is emerging voices for change. Our welcome to the young people on this platform. A very good morning, Amir. How are you?
Good morning to you too. I'm good. So yeah, YUFE or Youth, it stands for Youth United for Earth. We're a local youth-led NGO that focuses on empowering young people with resources, with skills that is needed to enter the climate sector. We want to inspire them by highlighting what other young environmentalists who are doing work in the field. And of course, we try to advocate as much as possible for young people. So, what are our wants? What are our needs? And we try our best to communicate back any policy that is being made, and just try our best to coordinate with other climate groups within Malaysia.
Yeah, and this is it must be a fairly difficult task. I'm not trying to second guess anything that your group does, but I'd like to kind of begin by understanding if you're in the business of preparing tools and resources. Who you mentioned other groups. With whom do you partner in this effort? Could you let us know some of your collaborators so we have a sense of who's working with you on this?
Right. So we've worked with UNICEF, we've worked with United Nations Development Program. Specifically, we help create the Youth Environmental Living Labs program. One of our co-founders helped out with that, and we still actively work with them to run like focus group discussions, things of the sort. On the NGO side, we've worked with Borneo Comrade to highlight, indigenous voices, specifically Baja Laut voices in Borneo. We've worked with Safe Rivers. We've worked with ASEAN or regional what do you call it? Regional bodies like REL, ASEAN Youth Forum. There's so many more. Like we've worked with MYD, Malaysian
Yeah.
Youth Delegation. Um, just that I can off the top of my head right now. Like Roots and Shoot
No.
also to help
Yeah.
run
Yeah.
our mentorship programs and of the sort. There's a very very long list
Yeah,
that I
no,
can go on and
that's
on.
that's terrific. That's terrific. And the reason why I asked is basically to give our audience a sense of how connected the youth are. Because there is a perception out there that today's youth are so distracted with their devices that they have precious little time to think about issues that will be central to how they live their lives on Earth in the future. And I wanted our audience to hear that the level of connectedness is actually very, very deep and very broad. And that for at least those of you who are involved with your organization, that you understand the full range of impacts. Like I said, this is in response to a perception out there that the young people are kind of wedded to their devices, and it's almost like they relate to the world, the real world, through their devices. And what we see from what you're telling us now, that your organization actually opens multiple windows for the youth of today to actually get a grasp of first-hand issues on the ground. If you're working with Roots and Shoots, if you're working with the MYD who go to the COP, if you're working with Borneo Comrade, that is actually a sign that your constituency at least is picking up all of these kind of real world challenges that are impacting us now already, and that will continue impacting us into the future. So may I ask, are you working with any organizations that are able to give you a sense of what kind of future conditions today's youth, today's young people will have to handle, to face, to deal with when it comes to climate and sustainability impacts? And which organizations can you think of that are dealing with things like climate scenarios in the future population sizes, maybe things like resource demand in the future? Could you shed some light on that?
Right. So like when it comes to youth and like the future of the climate and our future as a whole, the organization that pops up to my mind is UNICEF, and we've been working very closely with them to basically just not only inform us, but also help us inform them in what they could do in pushing more youth-centered, or rather centering children and youth within the climate agenda. And yeah, we just try to be responsive of different reports that come out and things of the sort.
May I know if you as you interact with these groups, as you engage with these groups, and then as you hear back from your own constituency, what positions are you taking on climate politics, as it were, and which groups or organizations do you find the young people more aligned with? When it comes to all of these different special interest groups that find themselves at the COP, and there are a great number of
Yeah.
them. Maybe you could name some of the groups that are now lobbying at the COP, so we can get a sense of how aligned you are with these different groups.
Right. I mean, if we look within Malaysia itself, I think a lot of young people are still quite unaware of COP, and I don't necessarily blame them. It's something that is thousands of miles away, that
Yeah.
takes tens of thousands of ringgit to just attend, even though you get a badge, right? So there's like a sense of disconnectedness with Malaysian youth when there's like a cost of living crisis. There is multiple genocides occurring across the globe. Like the job market is unstable, whatever, things of the sort. I think for Youth United for Earth in general, our position is climate justice. We want to make sure that when we think about a climate solution, when we want to decarbonize the economy or go towards like a greener future, we want to make sure that no one is left behind, or communities that are already marginalized and vulnerable receive protection, one, but also don't continue to be oppressed, discriminated, or marginalized. That is our general position. Um, in terms of special interest groups at COP, the ones that we generally align ourselves to is, for example, I'm sure you're aware of Youngo, but then there's an offshoot of that called Angry, which is an alliance of non-governmental radical youth. So we align more closely with their message, with the way that they govern, their stances on global issues that are happening right now, the Women and Gender Caucus. And overall, we just try our best because the Malaysian civil society doesn't really have a lot of say in what is happening at COP. But I think through a coalition, we just try our best to find the ones that really, I guess, uphold our values of climate justice and equity and things of the sort.
Uh, I'm actually very taken by your answer because it reflects a level of maturity and analysis and assessment that you sometimes don't find even among adults.
All right.
Okay, so let me compliment you on
Thank
that.
you.
The fact that you've already pointed out that there are dire issues nationally that need to be dealt with: the economy, of course, the cost of living, uh, and then the fact that there is continued disenfranchisement, inequity across groups, and there's sometimes a lack of representation. And yet you're able to pass all this out and say, look, it's really worth spending all that money to go to the COP, even if you, like I said, you are given an NGO badge from the Secretariat, when and you know be responsible for all those extra emissions. Um, I
Yeah.
find that shows a lot of depth. And yes, I'm familiar with Yango, having been at the COP, but I think that the angry is a cute acronym. But certainly attention grabbing, and when you open it out, of course it's much more than just emotion. It really
Yeah.
reflects a very thoughtful and a very nuanced approach, and yet a very firm approach to I guess guiding the role of advocacy and policy in your group's approach to climate. Now, um, you already mentioned that part of your mandate is to actually make sure that young people understand uh, what's going on with the climate.
Right.
And it's something that I've tried to do with adults for many years, and it's not equally successful across the board. I
Yeah.
can vouch for that. But I'd like to know from you whether you think that it's more through this kind of structured but informal or semi-formal information programs, education programs, outreach programs, that you actually get more traction and more a deeper understanding, buy-in on the importance of climate change, climate-related issues, climate impacts, climate risks among the young people? Or do you think that this is something that could more efficiently and more effectively be done through the formal education system? So in other words, should children already by the time they are in preschool be learning about how we get energy from the sun, how it helps things to grow, but how it also can cause places to be too hot and impact all kinds of living things. And then also, how our own lives, the cars we drive in, the energy we use at home, whether it's a water heater or whatever it is, um,
Yeah.
uh, have a feedback impact on our lives. What's your take on that?
I think for me, it should be a combination of both. Informal channels like social media, influencers, things of the sort, they can only go so far. But the reality is, a lot of young people, I think the general disinterest in not, I wouldn't say general disinterest, because a lot of young people would agree overwhelmingly that climate change is a crisis, even in Malaysia, right? They might not describe it as a climate crisis, but we experience it, even though we're not one of the most climate vulnerable in the region, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's how we talk about issues that require a whole of system approach, from, the way that we teach climate change education in schools. Because right now it's very science centric, and I feel like over the years trying to understand like what are different dimensions of climate justice, how does climate action look like, made me really understand that it's more than just a scientific issue. It's a economic issue. It's a historical issue because when we look at colonialism and things of the sort, um, you know, we have to acknowledge that, of course, you're not going to teach preschoolers that, but I think it's important to acknowledge that there is a human element of climate change, and it's not just gases and emissions and using solar panels, right? Um, Things that should be included in formal education channels should be, when we talk about solar panels, when we talk about incorporating solar energy into our energy grid, does our energy is our energy grid able to support renewable energy, like the input from renewable energy? Is where is the minerals coming from to build the batteries required to store the energy, to build the solar panels, to build the EVs, things of the sort? That is what we're missing in formal education spaces. Through informal, spaces, like what we do is mostly social media based. We can just try our best to try and fit in as much information in an infographic and reels, but it's truly dependent on the algorithm, right? So we try to branch out into outreach programs. So, for example, running focus group discussions with youth. And we don't try to, how do you say, we don't try to focus it necessarily like um or how do you think climate solutions should look like? Because we try to work with as young kids as young as possible. So, for example, our focus group discussion on the nationally determined contributions, the recent update,
Yeah.
we try to include children from Terengganu, which I feel like the East Coast is genuinely left out when we talk about the climate. Um, and we don't frame it in like, oh, what should the government do? Because these are 7-year-olds, right? Rather, it's like, how does a greener future look like? Can you draw out um how your neighborhood looks like? What does your parent talk about when it comes to the environment, things of the sort? So I think, just to recap, I feel like social media can be very effective, but the thing is that it's just like an overwhelming amount of information now, and everyone's just fighting to beat the algorithm.
Yeah.
And so to supplement that, I think formal channels, be it education, news, there should be, there should be a very strong emphasis in including like climate change into the syllabus. And there is a whole nother conversation about that, because I feel like there are some elements about climate change in the syllabus, but then teachers do not have the resources to carry that out. So it's a very hard question to answer directly. So I'm just trying to give like a landscape of how it is to be a young person and trying to
Yeah.
receive all this information.
No, I'm inclined to agree with you. And once again, I think it's a very exciting prospect, as well as a very daunting prospect, to kind of marry the science, because you definitely don't want to lose the scientific basis
Yeah.
of the study of an
Yeah.
understanding of climate, but then to sort of marry it with history, which gives us a context of how and why our cities developed the way they did, or were developed at first by our colonial masters, and then later on by people who were trained by colonial masters, and who may have perpetuated some of the I guess inappropriate technologies for dealing with or relating to the environment the way we have. And I'm talking specifically about channeling of rivers and very one-dimensional ideas of it's floods, we have to get rid of the water, and then
Mm-hmm.
we'll worry about droughts some other time.
Yeah.
But to also bring in a socio-economic element as well, meaning that the moment you start thinking about any kind of development, you already integrate, as it were, the socio-economic impacts, outcomes, intended or otherwise, into the mix. If I were a school going person in Terengganu or Kelantan, um, I would think that one of the karangan that I would be asked to write on a regular basis would be about Muslim Banjir.
Yep.
I as long as I've been in well, I grew up here obviously, but I've never been asked to write a karangan on Muslim Banjir, much less to even consider what we might be doing that might actually be aggravating the situation, and making it more difficult for us to handle Muslim Banjir. Or on the other hand, how we've used old technologies like houseboats and rumah tiang all this while to manage musim banjir, which is something that people go through every single year. I mean, but once again, I think that when you begin this kind of activity locally with communities, including Bajau Laut and things like that, and groups like that, then sort of it's twofold. One, you understand what they're thinking, and what they perceive the solutions to be, because in many cases what you might find is that conventional education might simply be imparting all of the and ingraining all of the quote unquote inappropriate solutions, so the maladaptation solutions, so it's, if you see in the Karangan things like, okay, pihak berkuasa sedang menjalankan program tebatan banjir yang dapat mengurangkan the aliran air ke kawasan rumah saya and things like that, then you know that something is quite amiss, because that means that they don't understand how hydrology works,
Right.
and how water obeys physical rules when it's flowing. But yeah, no, I think that's a very nuanced response and an approach. I do agree that we need to use all the avenues necessary and available to us to do this. I do want I know that we've got a little bit over a quarter of an hour left, and I want to move into an area that where even you might find difficulty, and that is how do you relate to potentially one of the most diverse demographics of people, and I don't envy you. Okay, but the young people in Malaysia have to be, particularly if you include the very young, have to be about one of the most diverse demographies. I mean, you've got people growing up in an Orang Asli settlement in maybe Jerantut, a place like that, who are so connected with the environment. They plant their own food, perhaps. They understand, where to be when it rains or when it doesn't rain. They understand the roles of the various flora and fauna, they're already, heaven forbid, outside of the house playing with a parang when they're 2 and 3 years old. And these are things that a person in the city would just have a completely freak out over. It's like, and you've got, like I said, people who essentially were born in a hospital and grew up in a high rise. At 3 and 4 years old, to them everything is dirty as long as it's below waist level. Everything below waist level is dirty. You shouldn't touch it. You shouldn't be there. You can't sit there. You can't play with it. I mean, so and then I think it's almost as if this dichotomy or this diversity gets even wider as they grow up, because some grow up with responsibilities to supply for a family and things, and on the other hand, others grow up becoming more and more distant, perhaps even going to school overseas in places like Australia and things like that. So how do you bring together a group as diverse as that, and even more importantly, how do you get them to push in a common direction for the future? Because there's a great chance that you ask person A what their future looks like, and they say one thing, and B, and then when you add the question of what do you think your future should look like, I think you get a whole host of different responses. as a young person yourself, how do you think you're going to try to handle this? And what can we do? As the old folks, what
Yeah.
can we do to help you to kind of bring together I don't know, a program or whatever it is to
Yeah.
help you out with this.
I think I find it quite not interesting, but quite hopeful that you're pointing out like very straightforward that young people are not just monolithic.
Oh yeah,
We're
sure, yeah.
a very, very diverse group, which a lot of adults that we've spoken to still think that, young people are just like X, right? Um,
Okay.
so I think first and foremost, I'll answer your second question or the second part of the question. I think what adults can do necessarily is not necessarily a program, it's not necessarily is nothing like whole system or changing policy. Like that is quite obvious, right? We need a lot of change in policies for young people to actually be included in like the stakeholder consultations, be included in policy making process, things like that. But what I do think is key, regardless of policy, is just our willingness to listen to younger generations. Um, I find it quite interesting because me and my mom, we have a very like kind of like sibling-ish dynamic because we debate a lot about topics that we agree or disagree. And I find that quite different compared to some of my friends, right, who might not be able to express their dissent on certain issues. And I think even in the household itself from like the wiser generation, I think having that intergenerational dialogue, that discourse between like, oh, I don't agree on X topic on how we solve climate change because this was how I did it when I was younger. And that kind of like helps us think for like move forward into a brighter future because we're working with one another rather than seeing each other as competitors or seeing each other as lesser than. Yes, young people have a lot to learn, but the way that we perceive the world is also extremely different. Or just go through the world, the worries, the wants, and the needs of young people is very different in comparison to a wiser generation. So I think for that part is that what needs to be done is just intergenerational knowledge transfer and a lot of listening from one another. I think like young people should be able to listen to the elder generation and vice versa. And there should be an openness to debate about topics, the openness to new ideas, which I think is quite important. Because the climate crisis is unlike any crisis that we've ever faced, right? It's a cross-cutting crisis that requires all hands on deck. So it requires a lot of learning and accepting new ideas. So now I'll go to the first part of the question, which is trying to relate. I have to admit that even we as the organization that focuses on trying to capture as many young people as possible, we struggle with this. In a recent because we're tracking COP virtually right now. In our coordination meeting like last week, um, all of us like question each other like what is the point of telling people about COP? Like genuinely, what is the point? Because how would a person that is struggling to, get an A for SVM or A levels or an A star or whatever, how or why would they care about, the nuances within
Yeah.
the Article 6 negotiations, right? Why would they care about the difference between mentioning supply chain, value chain in the Just Transition Work Program? Like how do we how do we like get young people to care not because of facts policies but just emotionally care the same way that young people are mobilized when we talk about being able to vote when we talk about what's happening in Palestine, right? Like how can we get young people to feel the same about the climate crisis? The tactics that we've tried to do in our social media programming, social media like content is to try to include real stories, real narratives. So there are different types of posts that we put out. So first is more of like a career kind of aspect, a career element. So we try to highlight young Malaysians who are already doing the work. And it's not just young Malaysians who grew up from a privileged background who has the opportunity to work in the climate. No, we try to include like indigenous artists, right? We try to include people in niche spaces like eco reporting or green reporting. So that when young people see this, they can think like, oh, like this is an area that kind of merges all my interests. That's one part. The other part is breaking down issues. This is the hardest one, I would say, because nowadays it's like everything has to be snappy, everything has to be easy to understand. So what we try to do is try to localize as much as possible these big issues, and we're still constantly learning. I think going to COP last year like opened our eyes to a lot of different techniques different countries use, and how far behind the climate scene, or rather the acceptance of climate within the public zeitgeist or public, I don't know, like the public acceptance of climate change or climate action, how different it is. And so we just try to localize it as much as possible and try to just reiterate, if you want to do something about the climate, you don't have to solve the entire problem, right? We are like a tree. Some people are going to be the roots who are working with grassroots communities. Some people are going to be the trunks. Some people are going to be branches, shoots, leaves, etc., etc. So I think we just try our best to not only localize, but also try to give a call to action, not just dump information at you. We try to avoid doing that. We have done that every now and then, but we try our best to put that out. Like, hey, this is what's happening. For example, illegal wildlife trade and trafficking. We try to put it out. We collaborate with organizations that do tracking on this, and then we try to break it down. Like, what are we going to lose if we let this happen, right? Or we try to bukukan lah, like traditional knowledge and traditional arts, like a project that we did with UNDP, UNDP's Youth Environmental Living Labs, or YEL, is a project called Jejak Warisan, where one of our co-founders went to Terengganu, who actually lives in Terengganu. She captured like the elders there. So, how do you traditionally make keropok leko, and how is the climate impacting that? Like keropok leko won't be here in a decade from now, maybe because of overfishing, because of the climate. How have we traditionally adapted to the climate, right? So, for example, when we go back to kampong, like doing raya and stuff like that, we would see that certain houses would be taller on stilts, and certain houses, like the one, my kampong's house, it is not built on stilts, it's on flat ground, because it all depends. We already know all
Yeah.
these things, so we
Yeah.
try to
Yeah.
highlight that as much as possible, and we try our best to like make the narrative very visible. Right. I think the big issue that we have with climate change, and I think the conversation is shifting because of the incredible work other organizations are doing, like Klima Aksi Malaysia, UNDP, UNICEF, other NGOs, is because we are not talking about, melting ice caps, or polar bears, or like things that are happening in global north, right? We are talking about things that we can see, like for example, flooding that happens so often, that to the point that we think that it's normal that it occurs this often, right? Like, oh, it's just a bit bad this year, but usually around this time of year we would experience it. Heat waves, like un climate infrastructure that is not climate ready, right? Like for example, sinkholes that are opening up in KL because it was just not meant to be in this kind of weather. So we just try our best to ground it. And I just want to like use this quote that Jane Goodall usually says, is that
Definitely.
from the mind to the heart, to the heart to the hands. And so I think trying to break down these complicated topics that is very scientific, very jargony, and very global north centric to something that we can see, we can touch, we can feel, and we can hear. Um, maybe not here, but like we can definitely see, and our parents have experienced it, we have experienced it, and just connect everything, because I feel like the the prerequisite knowledge of the climate is already there, but trying to connect it, right, is the hard part. Because I don't think anyone in Malaysia can go without saying like, oh, I haven't experienced some kind of climate disaster, or rather climate impact. We all have, one way or another. Like, unless you live in like somewhere remote, or like somewhere completely disconnected from reality, you have. But it's just using finding the language, right? is also the other hard part. And just to add a bit more, something that we've been trying to do more and more, and we realize it's such a huge gap, is the lack of local languages being included in climate terms, or rather, climate terms being translated into local languages. So, for example, the Paris Agreement or certain negotiation papers, all of it is in, or not certain, all of it is in English or the UN languages, right?
Yep.
Do we have that kind of translation in Malaysia, right? With the languages that we have? We don't. And so how are we going to talk about it in our day-to-day lives if we don't even have the vernacular to express it, to articulate our worries and concern? And how are we expected to have the nuance? And I think, again, this is the need of, like, this is why we need collaboration between NGOs and the government to make sure that when we talk about the climate, it's both through informal and formal spaces, so that we can really like create a climate ready vocabulary, I would say, put it like that. Because conversations are a catalyst of change, right? I know this is a bit off topic, but
No, no,
conversations
no.
are a,
No.
yeah, conversations are a catalyst for change. So if we equip young people with the and we try our best to do that also, but if we equip young people with the necessary language to talk about it, then we can finally, get the ball rolling with getting more people caring about it. Because to be fully honest, young people are talking about it, but it's mostly in urban English speaking areas, right? So very urban, like KL area, Selangor. Whereas in other states, is the same conversations happening in native languages.
Yeah, I'm also keep being taken by your ability to articulate some of the difficulties and challenges given the diverse demographic you're talking about. Um, and it's also very interesting to see that to make the environment and society part of your understanding, that you're actually reaching out not only in space but in time, talking to elders to get the views of quote unquote the wiser generation. I'm not sure I would apply that universally, but I think the idea that if you don't speak the you cannot have conversations that already hampered in many ways. Um, I'm not sure that if you went to kampong in Setia Alam that was flooded in 2021, you would necessarily find children there, school age, primary or secondary school age children that are unnecessarily urban and English speaking.
Mhm.
That area is still pretty much Malay speaking and clearly, if not rural or semi-rural, is semi-urban. Um, but I would agree with you that we need to begin a very comprehensive understanding process where people truly can internalize the fact that um, and it's interesting that you mentioned that there's some level of um, not to say insensitivity or tolerance, but there is a bit of resignation about the fact that things now are not the way they used to be. All right, so you've made reference to unseasonal floods, abnormal events, and you've also indicated that you have an understanding that they are becoming the new normal, right?
Yeah.
But as you also know, this is only the tip of the iceberg, because we see in
Yeah.
other parts of the world, like you said. So that new normal hasn't come here yet.
Mhm.
So in the closing minutes that we have, do you have a plan to make young people aware of that sort of incoming new normal that could bring very distinct and very difficult challenges, including with water resource availability, with food availability, and all that. It's not easy, but I'm just wondering if you've given any thought to that future new normal
Yeah.
that's kind of on the horizon and coming in.
Yeah. I think my quote unquote plan would, and it's already something that we already practice at youth, is that we don't want to approach climate action, or we don't want to approach young people with the lens of doom, right?
Definitely not.
As
Yeah.
right, especially in this space, there are a lot of parties that are banking on young people to burn out and stop fighting for the climate, fighting for a better environment. And so I think it's very important, and I think it's more attractive actually, when there are optimistic narratives. And it's very hard to hold space for that. I don't like using that term, but like basically hold space for optimistic stories or
Yeah.
optimistic narratives in a burning world. But I think to get young people on board, or rather, what I would push for more is like making information human. I don't know if that makes sense, but the way that we communicate from governments, from like top to bottom, how we talk about the climate needs to be more human and less sanitized, I would say. Um, young people already know that climate change is happening. I would say that they already know that the world is burning. I mean, some of my friends are already concerned if their kampongs will be around, like when they're older, right? Because it might sink. So I think there's nothing much to do to prepare, but the question is, are the elder generations prepared to accept young people, or get young people into the fold? I don't think, as much as I said earlier, I wanted to make it very clear that young people are aware that climate change is a crisis. Climate change is a crisis, right? Even though it might be in an echo chamber. But I think the most effective thing that we can do to make sure that young people are actually interested in talking about it is to to make young people feel like they have some stake in it, right? Because
Yeah.
we are going to lead the future country. So why is it so abnormally hard for us to include young people in climate decisions, right? If the issue is that we are unable to engage with documents or information in a meaningful manner, then provide us with the necessary tools and resources, right?
Yeah.
NGOs can only go so far. Um, that's one part. I think the other part is also the way that we talk about these issues. Like I said earlier, I think we just need to be more open to discussions, debates. Like I think everything can change in a couple of years.
Yeah.
Maybe the way that we talk about climate change is going to be completely different because we're nearing 2030 and 2035 and all those key dates, right? Which is a bit sad and scary with the global updates and things alike. But I think, yeah, just to summarize, young people are there. They know climate change is happening. I think we just need more collaboration between one another, more more local languages. And I think climate change should not just be about trees and forestry and things that are like very distant to the local mind, right? I mean, it also depends from region to region, but I mean, it's not just about forestry, right? It's not just about biodiversity. It's not about ecosystems, it's not just that, right? So we need to ground it in real concepts, real emergencies that we have right now about the economy, about militarization, like everything, so that young people in Malaysia in particular feel like they have or rather there is an impetus for young people to basically care about the climate.
Thank you very much. I mean, I think what you're doing is already extremely difficult, but I think extremely impactful. Maybe the idea that as you move through your various demographics and speak to people and bring people in contact with each other, maybe bringing someone from the coast in Terengganu, and when they come with them, when they come to the meeting, whatever it is, they can bring with them, things that have washed up on the beach that, are saying, this tea shop doesn't exist where I live, and yet this thing is washing up, in my kampong. I mean, so it's not to divide, but it's to inform.
Yeah.
I think so. So it's like you said, not just talking about trees, but talking about everything: plastics, microplastics, clothing, rare earth metals, magnets. All of these things are part of the conversation. I do wish you the very best. Thank you very much for agreeing to be a guest on this program. It's been very, very enlightening speaking to you. Like I said, I'm not sure which generation is the wise generation, but I do wish you all the best. And if there's anything that Climate Governance Malaysia can help and collaborate with you on, we'd be very, very happy to do it. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been speaking to NGO Ariff Amir Ali of Youth. I think it's been a very fascinating conversation. I hope you found this to be the case as well. We'll be continuing, as usual, our parallel coverage of COP30. And for that, I'd like to pass it on back to Arin. Arin, the floor is yours. Thanks again, Ariff.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you to the both of you for those very insightful discussion and the insightful perspectives that were shared. Sure, the audience would have really loved to hear more, but anyways, so now we will be moving on to the next session, which will be the C-Suite's highlight. So this will be moderated by Mr. Karl Godderis, the CEO of EUROCHAM Malaysia, together with our speaker, Ms. Joanne Rodrigues, the Chief Financial Officer for Affin Bank Berhad. However, this will be so this has already been pre-recorded, so we'd like to share a video of their discussion. Give us a moment, yeah?
Good morning, everybody, at Parallel COP series by CMG, where we have our daily C-suite highlights talking with Malaysia-based business leaders about sustainability. Today we have no less but Joanne Rodrigues, Group CFO of Affin Bank. Good morning, Joanne, and welcome.
Morning, Karl. Thanks for having me.
Most welcome. So as per usual, we have a daily topic. Today, the topic is Emerging Voices for Change, where we're going to discuss a few specific topics underneath that, which are nurturing innovation systems, climate entrepreneurship, and intergenerational collaboration. Now, before we kick off on these technical topics, I would like to start with my usual question to you, Joanne. Can I ask, growing up, how were you exposed to nature and the environment, and how do you think this has impacted the way you feel responsible for younger generations, but particularly the way you integrate sustainability topics in your business decisions?
Well, Colin, I guess I grew up in a very privileged setting. I had a nice big garden, fruit trees, lots of greenery around me. So, we were very lucky. It was easy to run around, whatever games we had space to play. And when I contrast that to what I see now over the last, 20, 30, 40 years that have gone by, less and less greenery, less and less spaces for the young to go out and play and explore, and that also pushes them more towards computers and social media, right? So that also, humans, we have this need to connect back with nature, whether we realize it or not, we do. Right, and my experiences growing up, helped for me to realize that now, so many decades later, how important it was, how it formed my thinking and also my appreciation of sustainability. The fact that the environment must be preserved for us to continue generations to come. that ability to just go out and, be calm by nature, and not all bricks and the high-rise buildings and so on. If you ask me about how that has, affected my current business decisions, it's not directly, but it's just an indirect understanding of how valuable this is. So when you make your decisions, when you see things that come to your table, you have more appreciation when something is, less damaging or more sustainable for the future.
Okay, I want to just briefly come back on that indirect understanding, because you've worked for quite a few years at the heart of the Malaysia's financial system, cutting across roles from audit strategy, CFO roles, and now even as a board member. Was there for you a moment when sustainability stopped being an external narrative and for you became more meaningful personally as a leader? And so what shifted your perspective in that sense?
Well, there was actually, on reflection, if I go back, and maybe that was 15 years or more ago, I've been working in banks, as you mentioned, for many, many years. And there was this particular project that disturbed me. Of course, I was very junior then. And I thought that, this project financing was being done at the great cost of the environment. It was then that it started me thinking about, well, what happens next? A lot of conversation was already happening, along the sustainable climate protection at that time, but it's still very nascent, right? And less so, that conversation is not very prevalent in Malaysia as well. So I did a lot of research then. I think at that time, there was this Equator Principles by the IFC, which I think is still very relevant today, if you think about that, and then still a lot of people have signed up. So, that was the moment where, it came to me that, there's a big role that banks can play. There's a lot of things that we can do to nudge the industries to something that is more sustainable. Of course, it's slow going. I think you from CGM or people would know how slow the progress is. But, it's getting there, and more and more people are getting aware, more aware and wanting to do things.
Let me maybe just diverge, because you brought up an interesting topic of intervening in this case, project finance that would have had harmful impact. Do you feel that form of decision-making power has been formalized more in the financial sector, that increasingly where banks are called upon to finance projects which you then evaluate to be harmful for the environment, that you actually can intervene without feeling guilty towards the results of the bank and the shareholders? What's your view on that?
I think more and more, yes. The regulators have a big part to play here as well. There's always that tension between profitability and responsibility to the world and environment. But I would say that the regulators here are playing a very strong part in helping the banks put in frameworks and disclosures, and in a way forces us to really think about what we're doing and the decisions we're making. So, for example, we now rate our loans and financing on a scale of 1 to 5, for the CCPT, on the whether or not the financing is going to be mitigation or not, or neutral, and so on. So that forces banks to really think about what they're doing and the financing we're giving. So yeah, there is the ability to intervene. You see it more, I think, in the Western countries now, but it's coming down, here in Asia as well.
Okay, that's good to hear. Now, one topic for today is nurturing innovation ecosystems and the role of banks in that environment. Because obviously banks typically play more the role of stabilizers in the economy, whilst if you look at innovation, particularly climate innovation, that of course requires experimentation and even risk-taking to the point of failure. Now, as an organization, how can Affin play a role in that? Where at one hand, you have to consider prudence, and at the same time, you have to allow for nurturing of risk-taking and innovation. Do you think, as an organization, you're equipped to take that position?
So banks play, yes, you're right, a very specific role. We nurture small businesses. We power up the economy by helping the smaller businesses leverage and then grow. Yeah, and from the bank's perspective, what's important is always whether or not what we support will grow to a level where the cash flow is able to pay back the loans. So when it comes to startups, whether or not it's climate-related startups or any type of startups, it's always the same question. Will this startup will be here and will scale within the next 3 to 5 years? Will they be able to repay? In that sense, banks don't differentiate whether it's a climate entrepreneur or whether it is just any business altogether. In that sense, there will be difficulties for entrepreneurs, looking for funding. There's always a gap, and that's why you have things like crowdfunding now. You have your private equity and venture capital. So they feel that really that startup funding segment and the government and their subsidies as well, before they can grow to a certain level where then banks come in. Now, personally, at our end, from Affin, when we take our decisions, sometimes it's not all about business then. If you really want to go in and support startups or certain initiatives, it cannot be with the view of profitability, because a lot of these may not be profitable ever. A very good example is the interceptor that's on our rivers right now, and the interceptor by Ocean Cleanup. So there's a very good example of a startup, started through crowdfunding and government support and personal benefactors. It's not for profit, so you can't go out and get loans. But from a bank perspective, let's say for us and MUFG, we've come in to support the operations and the maintenance of the interceptor that's in Klang, so that it can keep running, for the good of the environment and help with the river cleanup there. So I think from that perspective, banks can come in to support. It may not necessarily come only in one way, which is through pure financing.
Because Affin does more than just banking, right? You have a private equity component as well, or is that no longer active? Or can you say a bit about that?
We do have private equity, but it's very small and very nascent. So it's not. It's something that we are looking to build and to be able then also to take part in all these startups. But we're not in anywhere, in a way that we can scale.
Okay. Now to come back to the climate entrepreneur ecosystem, with startups in general, but definitely also in the climate space, what you often see is that they fail to make the jump from pilot-based projects to a scalable business, right? So, and that's not just in Malaysia, it's a global phenomenon, but also here. So what do you think is missing there in the ecosystem to facilitate more growth towards a scalable business? Is that a matter of finance? Is it mentorship? Is it the regulatory environment? Or is it just a matter of entrepreneurship and lack of risk-taking, or maybe something else? What would you say?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I would answer all of the above, actually. I think for climate-related innovation, yes, you're right, there's a lot of talent. And actually, we are seeing some really good stuff on the ground. We have also financed some entities, who are, doing some interesting work. We also have, I wouldn't call it a startup, but we do also finance solar energy, build from scratch and those kind of things. What is difficult, I think I see from the really small SMEs, the ability to scale, is the entrepreneurship. How you have to get, like they say, it takes a village to raise a child. It's very similar. You more than one person to come in to support these industries. Yes, the banks might come in with a bit of financing, or the PE might do that, but the government will also have to weigh in, whether it's through subsidies or some other form of support to build them, and exposure to the international community as well, that kind of networking. What is it possible outside? Can I get the mentorship from someone who is overseas, who have scaled something? It's a lot of different things that have to come together to help. And right now, the way I see it, a lot of times people are on their own, doing the best they can. If they were exposed to more the broader industry, more networking, more exposure, we might see them grow.
Okay. Now, at the start of our discussion, you referred to your own process of growing up and your appreciation of the environment and how you see current generation looking at these same issues. So obviously, dealing with climate change requires intergenerational collaboration, where we often see that the younger leaders are impatient, the older ones are a bit more cautious. And of course, we have to avoid that, if only because of differences in decision-making power, these characteristics, that they kind of even each other out. So how do you think we should bridge that better? And have you seen examples of where this intergenerational collaboration worked particularly well?
Yes.
Or inside the bank. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes me think a bit, but I would take it one step away from climate first. When you talk about intergenerational, anywhere, in the office, at home with your children, it all boils down to the one thing, whether both generations are listening to each other. Right? It doesn't matter whether it's a climate issue or it's a work issue or anything. Yes, the younger generation is in a hurry. They want to see things happen fast, and the older ones are always, I've been there, done that. It's not going to be so fast. And some things may be foolhardy and all that. But if both sides are able to listen to each other and come to a compromise, I think, then you have a very nice conclusion, right? It comes down to whether or not we are actually open to listening to each other without thinking of straight away cutting the other side down. Yeah. So that's one part. And looking at some of the things that have happened, I would just quote again ocean cleanup. The starter, Boyan Siat, right? He was 16 years old when he thought about it. And if he didn't have the older generation to help nurture and give the funding and to open up, for example, the rivers here, for him to put his interceptor or other products, I think he would never have been able to scale. And that's a very good example, for someone who started so young to be able to achieve, quite a significant inroads into the world. He's got 20 or 30 interceptors now all over the world in all the major. So that's a very good example. The other one, of course, everyone talks about her, but she's such a young girl as well, Greta Thunberg. If she didn't have that platform, you need the older generation to be able to give that platform for the younger to come out and have their voices heard. And the fact that she was able to take it to the next level and start a movement also shows that, when both sides listen to each other and give each other that platform to grow and work together, you can achieve some really great things.
Yeah, I believe it was the native Indians in the United States who had this expression saying, we don't inherit the planet from our parents, we borrow it from our children, right? And I always like that because that aligns a bit with the topic you just discussed, and maybe that's where we have to improve a little bit the way we communicate for sure. Now, something closer to your daily life as a CFO. I want to make it a bit easier for you, but because of course, as CFOs, you have a lot of influence over how things get measured, and and how things get valued in business. So do you believe, just because of the way we typically measure corporate success today, is that inducive to properly look at sustainability as a focus area for companies? And would you say there are certain metrics that maybe should be included in the boardroom discussions that would support a better sustainability agenda, for example, in banks?
Well, listen, Karl, right now in the banking industry, we already are exposed to a lot of frameworks and conversations also with the regulators about what needs to be measured, how we should look at climate, and sustainability as a whole. So actually, we do already have quite a lot of matrices to look at. Our board sustainability unit, we have a whole dashboard, as we start to build up what is our scope 3, how much are we bringing down on scope 1 and 2, numbers. And we also have at Affin a target. We want to reach 25% of our portfolio, related to ESG funding. So, we put that target. It is ambitious, but we want it to be top of mind, and we track it every month, right? We want to make that decision and make sure that we are more sustainable when it comes to our financing decision as well. And it comes back down to, at Affin, we have this term we call responsible banking with impact. It was purposely coined in this way because we thought that, if we wanted to be a bank, we had to be a responsible bank, and the impact that we have on the wider society and all that had to be a positive impact. So with that, I think that is one of the key things we always remind ourselves, and in the board, we also track where we stand when it comes to giving out financing, the percentage of green and social positive financing. So I wouldn't say that I would introduce one. I think it's over the years we've started to gravitate towards one, and that's where we are today.
Well, if not metric, then maybe how about process in terms of shareholder versus management discussions? Because if I'm not mistaken, the Sarawakian government is an important shareholder in the bank now. And
Yes.
Of course, Sarawak as a state has an important green agenda.
Yes.
Do you
Yes.
feel that kind of trickles into your board discussions, that you have an important shareholder with of its own a strong green agenda, and that they use the bank as one of their vehicles to implement that agenda? Just can comment on that.
I would say it's very complementary. I mean, we were talking about this even before Sarawak came into Affin as a shareholder, and I think to a certain extent, our values align, which could also be a reason why Sarawak thought that Affin would be a good fit as a banking subsidiary or associate. So in that sense, it's a very good match as far as we see. And yes, a lot of considerations on all the green initiatives that Sarawak is now trying to put in place, and we are very bullish about that.
Okay, now to round off our discussion, because this is all about COP. I remember conversations with the Sarawak government myself, where they were kind of proud of being participants at the COP conferences in the past. So. Is that still the case, that COP conference within your board or your organization is important? And what would you expect as an outcome of the conference?
I think we follow the conference quite closely. I think what is important is really the implementability, whether or not what is discussed can actually be implemented. At the moment, sometimes, I think there are challenges that we see. Even if you take just one point and just see it through, I think you would get a lot of headway, a lot of positive outcomes. Yeah. So if you ask me, it's just the ability to implement whatever that's agreed on.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I look at the time. We still have a few minutes. Is there any final message you would like to share to our audience?
Well, I think, lately, especially, over the last few years, the call for banks to take a more responsible stand, especially when it comes to influencing the industries to be more sustainable in their practices is a good one. I can say for sure at our end, we are really looking to contribute as much as we can. And then we hope that, as the whole country comes together, we'll see a lot better practices in Malaysia. And, that will take us to the next level as far as sustainability is concerned.
Yeah. Okay. Well, with that, I thank you so much, Joanna, for making time for this discussion. It was truly insightful. And with that, I hand it back to the secretary for the continuation of the program. Have a nice morning,
All right.
everybody.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
So even though the both of them were not here physically in the session, but we would like to thank them for that very insightful discussion. So now, moving on, we'd like to move on to the next segment, which is by Mr. Dave. So we would like to now move on to the session of the Live from Belém section, and this is by the BCG Group of Singapore. So yes, I'll now like to pass the floor to Mr. Dave Sivaprasad, who will be giving some remarks. Thank you.
Hello, hi, everyone. My connection me, last sharing on Belém and COP30. The last few days, I would say the action agenda has been, and there have been numerous engagements in the action agenda and the convenings on this, with the non-state actor players, in Belém. In addition, the topic of finance was done with the coalition of finance ministers. Very encouraging engagement where finance ministers and finance ministries are much more engaged in the adaptation and engagement around the ministries of finance play a key role in helping to facilitate the translation to resource allocation, and also a lot of discussion on country platforms and how this will play a role in. So this was another. Finally, a lot of nature and the big breakthrough efforts on the mangrove breakthrough, the coral breakthrough, and a nice intersection behind these efforts. So overall, the big takeaway for me, active and forward-looking action agenda, and encouraging to see a lot of convening and a lot of mobilized. So maybe I'll stop there and then back to you, Arun.
Thank you, Mr. Dave, for the remarks. And thank you for joining us live from Belém, even though the internet connection may be unstable. So now we'd like to move on to the next section. So the next section is known as the NGO Pavilion by WWF. And so today's keynote speaker from WWF would be Mr. Alfred Ralifo, who's the Senior Policy and Government Affairs Manager for WWF-Pacific. So now, again, he is also joining us online. So a pre-recorded video of his will be played. So just give us a moment, yeah?
Excellencies, colleagues, ladies, gentlemen, and friends. My name is Alfred Ralifo, and I'm based in Fiji with WWF. Before I begin, let me share what WWF's People Powering Biodiversity is about. People Powering Biodiversity is a global initiative that champions people-centered, community-led, nature-based solutions and initiatives to address the biodiversity and climate crisis. Its main aim is to ensure that indigenous people, local communities, women and youth, those who live closest to nature and protect it every day, are recognized, resourced, and empowered to lead climate and biodiversity action. People powering biodiversity advocates for equity, rights, and direct access to finance so that its frontline fields can create solutions that benefit all of us. It's about shifting from transactional to equitable, meaningful, and inclusive participations with indigenous people and local communities. People Powering Biodiversity is based in 5 different countries: PNG, Vietnam, Tunisia, Tanzania, and Congo. At COP30, the Nature COP, the theme of this event, Emerging Voices for Change, and the Brazilian presidency's principle of multi-rao remind us that collective effort is the only way forward. And this theme of multi-rao resonates well with WWF's People Powering Biodiversity initiative. If you need more information about this, please do not hesitate to contact me. To me, the best strategy to address any major crisis is to support and strengthen those at the front line. And that means our indigenous people, local communities, women and youth, people living with disability, the elderly, small remote islands to inland communities, because they are at the front line of the climate and nature crisis. And they are the best and experts in protecting nature and have thousands of years worth of indigenous knowledge, wisdom, and lived experiences. The science is very clear that nature and biodiversity is our greatest ally in fighting the climate crisis. And the science is very clear that indigenous people and local communities are the best in protecting and conserving nature. So that is where we should focus our efforts on reinforcing the front line. To me, every decision made at this COP must align with achieving the 1.5-degree goal of the Paris Agreement in order for all of us to stay alive. The cost of recovering from cyclones and climate change-induced hazards is very high. The cost of building resilience is very high too. Yet very little climate finance reaches the front line, directly to vulnerable communities where it is needed the most. So at COP30, decisions on climate finance must allow indigenous people, local communities, with and youth to easily and directly access the resources we need to protect our forests, oceans, and lands, to close the gap on mitigation, and to ensure nature thrives, which underpins our ability to adapt and build resilience in line with 1.5-degree goal. It also makes sense to increase investment in frontline communities to match the scale of our efforts. When we effectively protect nature, everyone benefits. Second, we call for indigenous traditional knowledge, solutions, and contributions, including protecting of their rights and the free, prior, and informed consent to be reflected in the decision text under adaptation, mitigation, finance, just transition, and loss and damage. The outcomes of the local communities and indigenous people platform must inform COP30 negotiations and decisions. And yes, we need a clear commitment to phase out fossil fuel without further delay, because without that, we cannot secure a safe future. Nature is climate action. Protecting biodiversity is not optional. It is actually a climate imperative. When we safeguard forests, rivers, and oceans, we safeguard the future for all of us. Emerging Voices for Change and multi-rao are more than just words. They are a call to collective action. Let us ensure that climate and biodiversity agendas work together and that justice and inclusion guide every decision. WWF's initiatives such as People Powering Biodiversity, the Oceaniverse Voices, are building networks and scaling best practices to help amplify emerging voices from around the world in spaces and places that matter. Because when we people power biodiversity, when we act in the spirit of multi-rao, we power hope. And hope is what will carry us to a future where both nature and humanity thrive. Thank you very much.
Even though he's not here physically, we'll still like to thank him for the insightful remarks, the short and sweet remarks that he gave. So now, with that being said, we would like to now move on to conclude today's program. So thank you all of us for joining us on the 7th day of the Malaysian Support for the COP30 event. We hope that you enjoyed the sessions and the discussions, and we're really thankful that everyone has joined us today. So before you leave, we'll be grateful if you could complete a short post-session survey. So a Zoom poll will pop up on your screen like it did a few seconds ago. So if it doesn't appear, simply click the poll icon at the top left of your screen. And do stay tuned for our upcoming sessions from tomorrow, November 19th, until the 21st of November, which is a Friday, where we'll continue exploring a diverse range of climate themes, which are all listed on the CGM website. Don't miss out on tomorrow's theme, which is Day 8, the diverse green and blue economy, taking place at the same time tomorrow. The recording of today's session will be available soon. We actually have a YouTube playlist, so it will all be available soon. And if you have friends or colleagues who would like to join, registrations are still open. We look forward to seeing you all again tomorrow. Thank you so much.